Reddit lawyers. What's the stupidest case you've been asked to take on? Story 1. I was a junior at a law firm when reception buzzed me someone had arrived with an urgent intellectual property issue. At the front desk stood a woman with darting eyes, a relentless facial twitch, and a wheeled suitcase that looked like it had seen war. I led her to a conference room, making sure I had a clear view of the exit. She hoisted the suitcase onto the table, unzipped it, and out came a cascade of handwritten pages, thousands of them, plus one lone half of a pair of scissors. Just one. She launched into her story. The city council had given her schizophrenia and hepatitis. Her pets? Abducted by aliens. And the whole thing, naturally, was orchestrated by the military and the Illuminati. Her fear? The local newspaper was going to mind-read her thoughts, steal her manuscript, and publish it without her permission. She wanted to copyright the whole thing before they could strike. What followed, surprisingly, was an entirely coherent conversation about copyright law. I explained she didn't need to register anything to have protection. Her rights began the moment she wrote it down. I suggested emailing a copy to herself and a trusted friend, and maybe even leaving a copy with someone she knew just in case. We talked for almost an hour. She thanked me and wheeled her suitcase out the door. She got solid legal advice. I didn't get jabbed with half a scissor. I hope she's okay. Story 2. I had this teacher once who used to work for one of the big-name video game publishers' top 10 kind of deal. He told me that when someone threatened to sue them over a disappointing game, they'd usually just pay up. Whatever the person asked for, $50, $100 it was cheaper than getting tangled in the local court system, which he described as a swamp made of paperwork and regret. But then came this guy, a law student, representing himself. He claimed the game was trash and wanted just a CNOT money, justice. Instead of paying him off like they usually did, the company thought, all right, let's play. And they played hard. They went full legal war mode. Filings, hearings, endless counters. Both sides spent months hurling legal nonsense at each other like it was dodgeball. Fees piled up. Time vanished. Everyone suffered. And then, just when the student thought things were about to tip his way, the company pulled a final move. They requested a court settlement in front of a judge. In the courtroom, they walked up, cool as ever, and set a crisp stack of $60 in cash on the table. Take it, they said, and stop wasting everyone's time. The judge blinked, nodded, and told the student that if he didn't accept the cash, he'd be fined for being unreasonable. Dude was crushed. He dropped $5,000 on travel and legal nonsense, just to end up with $60 and a story he'll probably never tell again. Story 3. I'm a lawyer, but this happened to a buddy of mine. So, he gets engaged, right? Great news for him. Except his ex-girlfriend apparently took it as a personal declaration of war. Out of nowhere, she sues him. Not just for custody of their 2 cats, but also for $500,000, claiming the cats were service animals and she'd lost their value. Spoiler. Those cats were about as close to service animals as a houseplant. Now, for context, one of the big reasons he broke up with her in the first place was her complete inability to take care of the cats. We're talking forgotten feedings, disappearing for days, the works. So this lawsuit wasn't about love or loss. It was all about the engagement ring on someone else's hand. They go to court. The judge hears the $500 K claim and just laughs it out of the room. But here's the kicker: Shay does get joint custody of the cats, which was obviously just her way of keeping a toe in the door of his life. So my friend did the only thing that made sense. He gave her the cats. Both of them. No more visits, no more drop-offs, no more her. Story 4. I interned at the law library inside a county lockup. And yes, it was just as wild as it sounds. There were a ton of memorable moments. An inmate charged with felon in possession kept coming down almost every week to comb through legal texts. His mission? Trying to erase a Walmart receipt and surveillance video. The video showing him buying a box of bullets, which gave the cops probable cause to dig deeper and find the weapon. One day, he proudly lugged in a law book he had purchased himself. He pointed to a section on reasonable expectation of privacy and laid out his argument. The cops never got his permission to watch the video, so it had to be an invasion of privacy. I nodded, flipped to the relevant pages, walked him through what reasonable expectation actually means. Still not clicking, so I asked, who owns the video? Walmart. Then don't they decide who watches it? But I'm in the video. Sure, but whose video is it? And like that, we were stuck in an existential ping-pong match. This loop went on for 5 full minutes until he finally snapped the book closed and stormed off like I'd just personally voided the Fourth Amendment. Story 5. I worked reception at a small personal injury firm where my unofficial job title could have been gatekeeper of absurdity. On my second day barely trained, coffee still warm, I got a call from a woman determined to sue her cat's vet for malpractice. Her reasoning? The cat had scratched her, and she claimed the scratch had unleashed a domino effect of organ failure, starting with her liver. She was convinced her cat was carrying some mysterious, undiagnosed plague, and the vet's negligence had doomed her. Still new and not yet hardened to the weirdness, I politely patched her through to an attorney. Minutes later, the call ended with a professional but definitive, "Yeah, we're not touching that," partly because we didn't do veterinary malpractice, mostly because the call had a strong aroma of lawsuit lottery hopeful. Edit. Yes, someone pointed out cat scratch fever is real. True. But the woman didn't come in with lab results or a timeline. She came in with vibes and vengeance. I got sick, and someone told me it might be from my cat. The vet didn't warn me. Can I sue? Story 6. I work in immigration. Girl came in as a pro bono referral. Seemed straightforward. A Chinese national applying for asylum on the grounds of religious persecution. Said she was a devout Christian, and if sent back, she'd be targeted by the authorities. Nothing unusual until I started reading her supporting documents. She'd provided statements about police raids, harassment, and arrests of church members. But the names and locations started ringing bells. A little Googling later, and Boomy realized I'd seen this exact story before, word for word. Turns out there's a whole underground market where you can buy a successful asylum narrative, complete with documents and testimonials. They're usually based on real cases that actually worked, then get repackaged and sold online like some kind of dark legal fan fiction. You're supposed to swap out the names, of course. This lady didn't bother, and just to sprinkle some extra chaos onto every witness in the documents, kept referring to her as a he. At first I thought it was a bad translation issue, but nope. The original Chinese had the same male pronouns. It wasn't a typo. It was just a copy-paste job gone wrong. Let's just say, I declined the case. Story 7. I never really practiced criminal defense, but then came Dennis. He walked into my office carrying 2 misdemeanor charges: driving while intoxicated and aggravated unlicensed operation of a motor vehicle. A bit of a mouthful, but Dennis swore on everything sacred that 1. He doesn't drink, 2. He didn't drive, and 3. His license was squeaky clean. I told him I wasn't the guy for this and handed him a list of local DWI and criminal defense attorneys. He pushed the list aside. "You're the one," he said. In hindsight, this probably meant every other attorney had already noped out of the room. So I charged him a modest $200 to dig through the paperwork and contacted the court, police, and DA's office. Here's what I found. Dennis had blown a .18 on the breathalyzer. When he insisted the machine was clearly broken, they ran a blood test. It came back at .22. The man had liquor running through his veins like a high-octane fuel line. And the never drove claim? Multiple squad cars watched him hop a curb, flatten a mailbox, and keep rolling. He was pulled over just down the street, seatbelted in the driver's seat alone. And the license? Expired 3 years ago. Suspended for 2 years before that. Basically a laminated souvenir. I called Dennis back in, told him he had no business dreaming of a trial. That's when he shrugged and said, "Well, maybe I was drunk, but I didn't know I was drunk." Why? Because, according to Dennis, his son had secretly spiked his green tea with Fireball whiskey, and because he had a cold and was eating cinnamon candies, he didn't notice the taste. That was his actual defense. Still, he retained me after I added a clause in the contract, making it clear he understood how terrible his odds were. And, of course, he insisted on a bench trial because he was convinced the judge would get it. Another signed clause went into that one, too. We lost. Naturally, he got probation, which I suspect was less about mercy for Dennis and more about the judge feeling bad for me. Then Dennis sued me for not defending him properly. His evidence? The guilty verdict. That case was dismissed before the judge even finished his coffee. Story 8. I once got a call from a gentleman, though, that's being extremely generous who wanted me to get his son-in-law out of jail over what he described as a candy possession charge. Before I could even blink, he launched into the full saga. Apparently, police had been dispatched to a mobile home park on a domestic disturbance. The 911 caller reported the guy was beating the hell out of her in the front yard for the whole neighborhood to see and told dispatch they'd better get there fast. By the time officers arrived, the chaos had simmered just enough for him to be found sitting in his truck, casually puffing on a candy cane. Not a euphemism, weirdly, while his wife bruised, bleeding, and with a couple of broken bones was on the porch screaming and chucking his belongings out the front door like a furious Santa Claus. Standard procedure. Cops ask if there are any firearms they need to worry about before approaching the house again. He calmly says, "Nope, should be in the box on the back seat." They ask if they can check. He says, "Go ahead." They open it. No gun, just sweets. Piles of them. Gummy worms, lollipops, something suspiciously marshmallow-shaped. "Oh wait," he says, "guns under the passenger seat." Sure enough, they find the gun, arrest him not just for the assault, but for the candy too, which turned out to be more chemical than confectionery. But here's the kicker. The man's father-in-law is the one who called me, wanting to hire me to defend him. After hearing the story, I asked, "Wait, if he's your son-in-law, then isn't your daughter the one he was beating up?" "Yeah," he replied without missing a beat. "But honestly, he's probably the best she's gonna do." I told him I was a patent lawyer, and that I don't touch criminal or family law. Not then, not ever. And I definitely wasn't starting with that circus. Story 9. I once represented a guy in the business of selling and leasing cars. Harmless enough, right? That is, until a minor fender bender somehow evolved into a lawsuit that reached levels of absurdity worthy of a courtroom soap opera. Here's how it began. A woman drove a company van as part of a work-sponsored carpool. She kept the van at home, picked up her coworkers, dropped them off after shifts the usual. One morning, she stopped at a red light. Another driver gave the van a little nudge from behind. No damage, they both got out, agreed it was nothing, and went on with their day. But then plot twist. One of the passengers decided, hours or maybe even days later, that she was injured. She went to a lawyer. That lawyer went full scorched earth. He sued everyone. The company, the driver, every single passenger. He deposed them all, fished for their insurance info, and fired off demand letters like confetti. One passenger said, "I don't have a car." The lawyer asked, "Does your family?" Then sued her sister. The sister explained she leased her vehicle and didn't carry personal insurance coverage came with the lease. And that's how my client, a guy who'd never met any of these people, found himself sued over a leased vehicle he owned on paper but hadn't laid eyes on in months. No damage. No one went to the hospital. But in the end, a harmless bump at a stoplight set off a legal pinball machine that dinged half a dozen strangers and somehow ended up in my inbox. Story 10. I used to do it for a family law firm. One lady just blew the doors off normal. She walks in asking to speak to an attorney about her divorce. No big deal standard stuff. She gets into a consult with one of our lawyers, this older gentleman in his late 60s, calm, soft-spoken, straight out of central casting for retired judge vibes. She tells him she wants to divorce her husband for abuse. The attorney listens, nods, and gently advises her that since the marriage was only a few months old, the fastest way out might be a no-fault divorce clean cut. No drama, just walk away. And then she snaps. Starts yelling, throwing things at him, hits him too. Right there in the office. He's just sitting there with his glasses sliding down his nose while she's mid-meltdown screaming, "If I could divorce him for times, I can do it a fifth." Yep. She had married and divorced the same man 4 times already. This was round 5. Our firm passed on the case immediately. But our sister firm, basically the original firm ours branched off from, ended up taking the husband's side. Turns out he was the actual victim. She'd been running the show at home, allegedly threatening to tell the police he was abusing her and the kids if he didn't obey. Full-on emotional hostage situation. So, yeah, 5th time wasn't the charm. Story 11. I used to work for a big-name national insurance company, the kind that deals with more ridiculous lawsuits in a month than most people hear about in a lifetime. One day, we got a claim from a guy who'd apparently been visiting friends out in the country and made the stellar decision to get blackout drunk and go exploring. By exploring, I mean he wandered across the road into a clearly marked farm signs everywhere. No trespassing, beware of dog. In both English and Spanish, just in case sobriety wasn't your only issue. He stumbles all the way down the driveway, beer in hand, and is greeted by a large, very vocal dog chained to a post, absolutely losing its mind, barking at him. Farmer steps outside and yells, "Stay back from the dog!" But our guy, brimming with confidence and probably cheap whiskey, slurs out something like, "Nah, I'm good with dogs," and proceeds to reach out like he's some kind of canine whisperer. Spoiler, he was not. The dog promptly removed one of his fingers. Clean, Off. In a panic, he drops his beer bottle, screams, and sprints back across the street. The farmer, being more decent than necessary, tries to save the finger for possible reattachment, but the guy vanishes, just disappears like the world's worst magician. So the farmer hands everything over to the cops. Soon after, we get the claim. We deny it, of course. I mean, come on. But this guy is determined. Lawyer's up. We send over the documentation. Lawyer reviews it, then nopes out faster than the idiot ran from the dog. Repeat this about 3 more times. Each new lawyer would start confident, see the evidence, then quietly exit stage left. Still, the guy kept coming back, insisting we owed him for his emotional trauma. I'm just saying, if you walk past warning signs in 2 languages, try to pet a barking farm dog while drunk, and leave your own finger behind like it's a tip. Maybe trauma isn't the only thing you should be reflecting on. Story 12. I once defended a man accused of stealing crowbars. Yes, plural. A real high-stakes heist. The allegedly stolen tools were found in the back of his pickup, and the state was ready to throw the book at him. Well, maybe just a small pamphlet labeled petty theft. At trial, the supposed victim marched in with 2 of his buddies and swore up and down that the crowbars were his. Claimed he'd used them regularly, even fondly, and his pals backed him up like it was the climax of a courtroom drama. Then we called our side. My client, his brother, and his girlfriend all testified that, no, the crowbars were his. They'd been using them earlier that day for what I can't even remember. Probably light crowbarring, and that was the whole show. Just 6 adults swearing passionately about who had the longer history with a pair of steel sticks. The jury didn't take long. Not guilty. But the best part? A juror later wrote a letter to the judge. She was a high school civics teacher, passionate about the justice system, and she said, quote, this was the stupidest waste of time she had ever endured. Story 13. I once had a guy come in wanting me to handle his personal injury claim from a road traffic accident. All standard until it wasn't. Instead of telling me what happened, he says he's written a poem about the accident in Yoruba. I tell him I don't speak Yoruba. Not a word. Never heard it spoken in my life. I'm not even from a region where someone might reasonably assume I've got a Yoruba phrasebook tucked away somewhere. It's a West African language. I am very much not West African. I try to explain this politely, but he gets increasingly insistent. He must read the poem in Yoruba right now. Eventually, I surrender to the madness. Fine, I say. Read it. He does. It takes him 20 minutes. 20 long, confusing, poetic minutes in a language I don't understand, delivered with great passion, while I sit there wondering how I ended up in this weird corner of legal limbo. When he's done, he leans back, looking pleased as punch. So, he says, now that you've heard it, I'm sure you'll take my case. I start trying to ask him for actual information like, say, what happened in the accident? But nope. He refuses to answer a single question. Says the poem contains everything I need to know. I tell him, in so many words, to kindly fudge off and stop wasting my oxygen. He leaves, but not really. He spends the next hour standing right outside my office window, reciting the same damn poem into the void, in Yoruba. Again, and again, and again. Story 14. After law school, I landed a job at a small firm tucked away in a quiet rural town. One slow afternoon, a partner's cousin comes pedaling up to the office on a bicycle like he's delivering secrets from the Cold War. The partner takes one look out the window, mutters, "Nope," and hands him off to me. The cousin walks in, reaches into his weathered jacket, and pulls out a Ziploc bag. Inside is a single, solemn slice of baloney. Embedded in it is a small piece of metal, maybe from a machine during processing, maybe alien tech. Who's to say? He lays it on my desk, like it's Exhibit A in the trial of the century, and announces he wants to sue for millions. I go through the basics. Did you eat it? No, I spotted the metal first. Were you hurt? No, but we passed it around and looked at it. So, you held a weird baloney slice, and now you want damages? Exactly. I explained that yes, technically it's a defective slice of lunch meat, but without any injury, all he's likely to get is maybe a free pack. Maybe. He looks devastated. Like I just told him his dog ran off with a ham sandwich and never came back. Before leaving, he solemnly hands me the baloney like it's evidence in a custody battle, and I promise I'll have his cousin, the partner, take a look. I walk it back to the partner's office, drop the bag on his desk, and recount the tale. He laughs so hard he nearly chokes. The secretaries come in to see what the commotion is, and the whole office dissolves into laughter. We ended up putting the slice of bologna in the office freezer, and as far as I know, it's still in there, preserved forever. The firm's unofficial mascot of damages narrowly avoided. Story 15. I hand out a lot of business cards part of the gig, but when you cast a wide net, you're bound to catch something weird eventually. Enter Mr. Bob. Not his real name, but close enough to the vibe. Mr. Bob reaches out to me with a very serious expression and an even more serious question. Could I help him sue the federal government? Specifically, the Department of Defense, Homeland Security, the Secretary of State, all of Congress, and, oh yeah, the President. That alone should have sent me sprinting in the opposite direction. But instead, I did the lawyer thing and asked, okay, why? With all the confidence of someone reading a grocery list, he explained that the government had kidnapped him and subjected him to a series of painful experiments with the help of the reptilians. Yes, those reptilians. Apparently, the government and lizard people were colluding on some vague, sinister plot against humanity. But don't worry, he escaped. Thanks to a brave reptilian double agent who risked it all to help him break out. He'd been laying low ever since, waiting for the right time to sue everyone. That was when I mentally packed my things and left the conversation. Still, I played it cool. Told him to wait in the lobby while I made a quick call to the local police, just to be sure he wasn't recently missing from a prison or padded cell. Spoiler, he wasn't. I came back, put on my best lawyer face, and broke it to him gently. If these government agents are working for the reptilians, then technically they're no longer U.S. citizens. That means they're subject to intergalactic law, which I, regrettably, do not practice. He looked genuinely disappointed, gave me a sad little nod, and walked out like a man who'd just been turned away from the last lawyer on earth. Best and worst day of my career. Story 16. The poor pregnant woman hit by on-duty cop case. About 10 years back, I was grinding it out at an auto insurance defense firm in Florida land of swamps, sunburn, and the endless PIP circus. For the uninitiated, PIP stands for Personal Injury Protection. It's the bare minimum insurance Floridians need to slap new tabs on their car. It maxes out at $10 K. Here's the scam. Ambulance chasers funnel clients to chiropractors they recommend. The chiro racks up $9,999 in massages and stim therapy, then hands the patient a lollipop and says, "Congrats, you're cured." Q. Insurance company refuses to pay. Chiro sues. And since Florida law says if the chiro wins anything, they get attorney's fees, the lawsuits are endless. Thousands of them, all practically identical. Insurance defense attorneys cut their teeth here. Plaintiffs' attorneys and medical experts rake in cash. Chiros get paid and collect 11% interest while waiting. It's basically legal loan sharking with aromatherapy. Soon to the case that broke me. Our insured is a young woman of color, living in a rougher neighborhood. She's 9 months pregnant, pulling up to a four-way stop when she's rear-ended by an on-duty police officer in his patrol car. She hits the steering wheel. The cop does the human thing, checks on her, calls an ambulance. She's taken to the hospital. Baby's fine. She gives birth later, no complications. But afterward, she goes to a chiropractor for the usual $10 K worth of treatment. Now the company wants to fight this one. Why? Because she wasn't hurt in the accident. She just wanted post-pregnancy massages. I thought they were kidding. They weren't. So the strategy was subpoena the woman, drag her into court, and somehow convince a jury she wasn't in pain from a collision while 9 months pregnant, but from vague woman issues. Subpoena the cop who hit her and try to get him to testify that calling an ambulance for a pregnant woman he just rear-ended was an overreaction. A cop on the stand, admitting fault, while his body cam probably caught every second. We looked at the partners like, "Do you want us to implode in court? Because this is how you implode in court." A week of arguing later, they agreed to settle. I gave my notice and walked out. A few months later, I opened a brewery. Now I make beer, sell beer, and go home without needing to cross-examine a chiropractor or put a pregnant woman on the defensive. 10/10 would recommend. Story 17. Most of the time, it's just really stupid clients. You don't always realize they're stupid until you've already agreed to meet them. Take this one guy who called me up and sounded completely normal, calm, articulate, nothing set off the alarm bells. We agreed to meet at a bar. His choice, red flag in hindsight. And that's where the train left the tracks. He wanted to sue his ex-wife. Fine, he was already suing her. But he also wanted to sue her lawyer, the judge, for endangering his kids by awarding her custody, his church for kicking him out after she got a restraining order, his bank for letting her drain their joint account, his cell phone company for not canceling her number before the divorce was finalized, and his psychiatrist who had the audacity to diagnose him as a paranoid schizophrenic, clearly part of the grand conspiracy to ruin his life. He genuinely believed all of these people and institutions were working together in a full-blown villain monologue-level plot against him. And the cherry on top? He wanted me to take it all on contingency. "There's a lot of meat on these bones," he said, totally serious. "We can go halfsies on whatever you win." Yes, he said go halfsies. Needless to say, I did not go halfsies. I went home, alone, with a story. Story 18. Lawyer here. Back in 2016, I drafted a will for a buddy of mine, solid guy, bit of a wild card. The will itself was standard stuff. The context, however, was like watching a soap opera written by a committee of confused lawyers. He'd been through a vicious divorce in 2011. Military retirement, she got half. Classic. Then, in 2013, she bought a house. By late 2015, he moved in with her. Now, fast forward to our estate planning meeting. Here's what I learned. He slept on the couch, paid her rent like a tenant. They wore wedding rings, called each other husband and wife, had never officially remarried. And the kicker? We were in a common law marriage state. All they needed was cohabitation, presenting as married. Intent to be married? Yeah, that one was a Schrodinger's requirement, maybe yes, maybe no, depending on who you asked and how good their lawyer was. Also, we're in a community property state. So dying without a will while accidentally married can seriously rearrange your estate plans. So I asked him, "Okay, who do you want to leave your assets to?" His answer? Everything to ex-wife. She'll make sure it goes to the boys. Cue alarm bells. I explained, legally, he'd be putting all his assets in a gift basket and hoping she'd pass them on to their sons. Could she? Sure. But could she choose not to and keep it all? Absolutely. On the flip side, if he died without a will and wasn't technically married, she'd get nothing. Unless, of course, she rolled the dice in court and argued they were common law, marriage expensive, messy, dramatic. I suggested all the reasonable things. Split the estate. Set up a trust. Literally any plan that didn't rely on vibes. He wouldn't budge. Nah, just leave it all to her. So I ran it by a colleague who's an estate planning wizard. When I explained the situation, his reaction was somewhere between horrified fascination and legal whiplash. He sleeps on the couch and calls her his landlord? But they wear wedding rings? What even is this relationship? In the end, my friend never executed the will, just walked away from it. Classic. Story 19. Paralegal here. Had a case once where a guy wrapped his car around a pole. Classic late-night crash. His story? He swerved to avoid a cyclist. Also, the stop sign was too hard to see. Neither excuse really erased the fact he was doing pole art with his sedan. But hey, we don't judge, we litigate. After months of discovery, depositions, and enough paperwork to kill a mid-sized forest, we were gearing up for trial. Then, just days before court, we stumbled across a report buried in the FileSon EMT's account from the crash scene. And that's when everything went sideways. Apparently, when first responders arrived, they found our client in the driver's seat. Pants around his ankles, bleeding and streaming prohibited content on his phone. Yeah, that kind. When we confronted him, expecting denial or panic, he barely blinked. Said the EMT must have forged the report. We politely advised him we were withdrawing representation. It was less about legality at that point and more about self-preservation. Some hills aren't worth. Story 20. I spent 4 years giving free legal advice at a pro bono law center, the kind of place where you meet every type of person society doesn't quite know what to do with. I had crackheads trying to sue the police for stealing their Haribo. I had someone try to file a restraining order against Sunlight. But one woman? She won the Chaos Trophy. She was middle-aged, calm, polite, and wanted to sue a scaffolding company. Why? Because they'd put up scaffolding next to her flat while working on the neighbor's place, and she claimed that a burglar had climbed it, entered her window, and stolen 50 pounds. Zero worth of luxury goods from her bedroom. Suspicious? Yes, but I keep a straight face and ask what was taken. She rattles off a laundry list of Gucci handbags, Montblanc pens, designer sunglasses, the works. It sounded like someone had knocked over a Milan showroom. I blink. I'm a finance lawyer. I can't afford that kind of inventory, and I bill by the hour. So I ask what she does for a living. She tells me she's been on benefits for 18 years, living in a council flat the whole time. Okay, so maybe they were gifts? She says yes. A generous friend gave them all to her. Receipts? Number? Photos of her with the items? Number? Bank statements? Number? Could the friend provide proof? Sadly, No had just passed away. Mysteriously, unexpectedly. She seemed more annoyed than sad. I try another angle. How do you know the burglar used the window? Well, it couldn't be the door, she says. I've got 3 heavy-duty locks on it. 3 locks? Yeah, my son's a candy dealer, drug dealer, and a convicted burglar. Him and his mates are always nicking stuff from me. Right. At this point, I gently inform her that our center only deals with small claims, £5,000 max. Without blinking, she replies, "Oh, then I'll just say it was £5,000 worth." Of course you will. I then explain polite that even if we could somehow make a case against the scaffolding company, she has no evidence, no documentation, and a convicted felon with keys to her flat. We have limited resources, and her case doesn't meet the threshold. That's when the switch flips. She accuses me of slander, screams that I'm a sexist pig, threatens to sue me, and promises that her son will come rob my house. I sit there like a stone. Eventually, she storms off, still yelling, and I quietly close the file, stamp it with a red marker, and add her to our internal Never Again list. Story 21. The first firm I ever worked at was back in my hometown, a quiet suburb outside Chicago. He was already a legend in the office. The partners warned me. He's from Spain, eccentric. They handed me a letter from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. The client's application had been rejected, and they wanted me to draft a response. Easy enough until I opened the file. The client was attempting to trademark the sun. Yes, our Sunday. Giant, flaming ball of gas. He wanted to claim it as his intellectual property so he could charge every government on Earth a 6% royalty on their GDP for using it. A cosmic tax, basically. Naturally, I assumed this was performance art. But no, he was dead serious. And, as he wrote in his attached licensing structure, he graciously exempted developing nations from paying the solar fees he saw fit, which was basically a celestial version of I'll allow it. I refused to submit the response to the USPTO, partly on ethical grounds, mostly because I didn't want to explain to a federal agency that my client was trying to sue Earth for sunlight. A few months later, the firm imploded for entirely different reasons. One of the partners deposited a forged cashier's check into our client trust account, which, mind you, held funds for about 50 different clients and immediately wired the money to Japan. When the bank figured it out, they yanked the entire balance out of the trust account, leaving it not just empty, but overdrawn. Every lawyer reading this just felt their soul leave their body. The firm went under. I packed up my degrees, my stapler, and what was left of my dignity, and walked away. Story 22. Guy calls up wanting us to run an unfair dismissal case. He'd been working out in a rural area, living in one of those work camps think bunk beds, BBQs, and questionable hygiene. One evening, he's grilling some fish and gets into it with a group of Cambodian co-workers. According to him, they were taking up too many tables. Very serious stuff. At some point, he claims one of the Cambodians dropped a Nefeno lunging, no threatening, just a knife, on the ground. But in his mind, that was a hostile act. So, naturally, he picks up the knife, starts waving it around at the group and yells, "How do you like being threatened with a knife?" He's promptly fired for serious misconduct. Now he wants us to file an unfair dismissal claim. His argument? The Cambodian guy didn't get fired too, and he started it. Also, he adds, those Cambodians can't be trusted, as if that was a mic drop instead of a racism alarm. Because he's a union member, we have to take the case to conciliation. No choice. The kicker? When we try to book the conciliation, he's on holiday in Cambodia. I had someone try to file a restraining order against Sunlight. But one woman? She won the Chaos Trophy. She was middle-aged, calm, polite, and wanted to sue a scaffolding company. Why? Because they'd put up scaffolding next to her flat while working on the neighbor's place, and she claimed that a burglar had climbed it, entered her window, and stolen 50 pounds. Zero worth of luxury goods from her bedroom. Suspicious? Yes, but I keep a straight face and ask what was taken. She rattles off a laundry list of Gucci handbags, Montblanc pens, designer sunglasses, the works. It sounded like someone had knocked over a Milan showroom. I blink. I'm a finance lawyer. I can't afford that kind of inventory, and I bill by the hour. So I ask what she does for a living. She tells me she's been on benefits for 18 years, living in a council flat the whole time. Okay, so maybe they were gifts? She says yes. A generous friend gave them all to her. Receipts? Number? Photos of her with the items? Number? Bank statements? Number? Could the friend provide proof? Sadly, No had just passed away. Mysteriously, unexpectedly. She seemed more annoyed than sad. I try another angle. How do you know the burglar used the window? Well, it couldn't be the door, she says. I've got 3 heavy-duty locks on it. 3 locks? Yeah, my son's a candy dealer, drug dealer, and a convicted burglar. Him and his mates are always nicking stuff from me. Right. At this point, I gently inform her that our center only deals with small claims, £5,000 max. Without blinking, she replies, "Oh, then I'll just say it was £5,000 worth." Of course you will. I then explain polite that even if we could somehow make a case against the scaffolding company, she has no evidence, no documentation, and a convicted felon with keys to her flat. We have limited resources, and her case doesn't meet the threshold. That's when the switch flips. She accuses me of slander, screams that I'm a sexist pig, threatens to sue me, and promises that her son will come rob my house. I sit there like a stone. Eventually, she storms off, still yelling, and I quietly close the file, stamp it with a red marker, and add her to our internal never again list. Story 21. The first firm I ever worked at was back in my hometown, a quiet suburb outside Chicago. He was already a legend in the office. The partners warned me. He's from Spain, eccentric. They handed me a letter from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. The client's application had been rejected, and they wanted me to draft a response. Easy enough until I opened the file. The client was attempting to trademark the sun. Yes, our Sunday. Giant, flaming ball of gas. He wanted to claim it as his intellectual property so he could charge every government on Earth a 6% royalty on their GDP for using it. A cosmic tax, basically. Naturally, I assumed this was performance art. But no, he was dead serious. And, as he wrote in his attached licensing structure, he graciously exempted developing nations from paying the solar fees he saw fit, which was basically a celestial version of "I'll allow it." I refused to submit the response to the USPTO, partly on ethical grounds, mostly because I didn't want to explain to a federal agency that my client was trying to sue Earth for sunlight. A few months later, the firm imploded for entirely different reasons. One of the partners deposited a forged cashier's check into our client trust account, which, mind you, held funds for about 50 different clients and immediately wired the money to Japan. When the bank figured it out, they yanked the entire balance out of the trust account, leaving it not just empty, but overdrawn. Every lawyer reading this just felt their soul leave their body. The firm went under. I packed up my degrees, my stapler, and what was left of my dignity, and walked away. Story 22. Guy calls up wanting us to run an unfair dismissal case. He'd been working out in a rural area, living in one of those work camps think bunk beds, BBQs, and questionable hygiene. One evening, he's grilling some fish and gets into it with a group of Cambodian co-workers. According to him, they were taking up too many tables. Very serious stuff. At some point, he claims one of the Cambodians dropped an Ifeno lunging, no threatening, just a knife, on the ground. But in his mind, that was a hostile act. So, naturally, he picks up the knife, starts waving it around at the group and yells, "How do you like being threatened with a knife?" He's promptly fired for serious misconduct. Now he wants us to file an unfair dismissal claim. His argument? The Cambodian guy didn't get fired too, and he started it. Also, he adds, those Cambodians can't be trusted, as if that was a mic drop instead of a racism alarm. Because he's a union member, we have to take the case to conciliation. No choice. The kicker? When we try to book the conciliation, he's on holiday in Cambodia.